Hello and welcome. My name is Carol Carter, and I'm the founder and CEO of Global Minded. We create a capable, diverse talent pipeline by getting more women, people of color, underrepresented, and first generation to graduate high school and college into the education, employment, and economic mobility pipeline. We do this by connecting students and those who work with them and those who want to hire them to the role models, mentors, internships, and jobs that they often need to be able to get to financial freedom. So we're delighted that you're joining us. This is our STEM and Technology Week. We are taking the whole Global Minded 2020 event virtual this year with several sessions. I shouldn't say the whole event because about a third of the events are rolling into 2021. But we have a lot of people who were up for doing their sessions virtually, and we're delighted that the Space Foundation today is one of those groups because they do incredible work and really are such a strong bedrock to the entire aerospace community and that entire talent pipeline. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Audra Peck. She administers the development and the implementation of the Space Foundation's education programs that support science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, STEAM, education. This includes establishing project goals, developing educational programs, including the popular Discover the Universe field trips, the Space in the Community Outreach Program, virtual field trips, and educator professional development events. She oversees the Space Foundation's education programs in Colorado Springs, along with education labs, including the Northrop Grumman Science Center, featuring Science on a Sphere, Mars Robotics Laboratory, AGI Space Missions Simulation Laboratory, and the Battelle Underwater Drone Lab. So it's great to have you all here, and Audra is going to introduce us to her panelists today. So welcome, and thanks so much for joining us at Global Minded.
Well, thank you. Thank you. This is super exciting for us to be here today. I'll introduce a couple important folks that are here with me as well. Down next to me, actually, you'll see Bryan DeBates, who's the Vice President of Education here at the Space Foundation. His background is also in education, and I'll let him introduce himself a little clearer.
Sure. My name is Bryan DeBates. I have been in formal and informal education for 35 years. Spent 13 years in the classroom as an elementary teacher, 14 years now with the Space Foundation. And I oversee not only Audra's team and our education outreach programs, but also our Space Foundation Discovery Center, which is a space museum and science center located here in Colorado Springs.
And we also have with us Keith Barger, who is our Senior Space Education Specialist. He is actually also part of the education team here. Keith, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, so like Audra said, my name is Keith Barger, and my background is also in education, so coming up on about 10 years in education. Spent a lot of my time in teaching high school science, and then got onto the Space Foundation about 4 years ago, and have been loving my job ever since.
Very good. Thank you. So Keith is going to actually kind of be our moderator today. You might be able to see on your screen the slide deck that we've got to share with you. And I understand, Carol, that this is going to be kind of shared out on the YouTube channel for you guys, which is great.
Yes, I'm very glad that you mentioned that. It's the Global Minded 2020 YouTube channel. So be sure to share it with your colleagues and students who will be interested as well.
Very good. Well, thank you. And thank you for having us today. We're kind of here to talk a little bit about the career pathways that exist for students today, and kind of reconnect it with the COVID issue that we're seeing from an educational perspective. Again, I was in education for, I'm close to 16 years now, everything from being in the classroom to being an administrator to then opening schools to serve STEM needs and STEAM needs for students. So we kind of have a little background here between us. I think probably close to about 35 years of educational background to share with you today. And just kind of wanted to put some of our insights out there in front of you. So Keith, if you don't mind flopping to the next slide, we'll go ahead and get started and share what we want to with you guys today.
Sounds good. And for any of those who happen to turn in some questions, we'll try to save some time to do some Q&A at the very end. So if you have any questions, definitely make sure you enter those into the chat box or the Q&A box. And we'll try to address those after our session. We'll try to save a little bit of time there. We're all educators, so we have a tendency to talk a little long, but we'll try to stay on a tight schedule and save some time for some Q&A. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. And so I'll pose you guys the first question. What is the Space Foundation and what do you do?
So the Space Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit. Our world headquarters is in Colorado Springs. We have field offices across the country. For a nonprofit, we do a lot of different things. We're probably best well known for the Space Symposium. It's the largest trade show and conference in the world for the space industry. It's held at the Broadmoor Hotel each year in April here in Colorado Springs. But we do a lot of other things too. We do a lot of international work. We represent the U.S. at the United Nations on the Committee for the Peaceful Use of Outer Space. We do research and analysis for the space industry. We work with NASA on certifying technology transfer products that have spun off from space technologies. And then, of course, we have the education department, which, as I said earlier, consists of our Space Foundation Discovery Center here in Colorado Springs. And then Audra is going to tell a little bit about what we do as far as our education outreach programs. So, oh, and I forgot to mention, we just launched yesterday our Center for Innovation and Education. And this is kind of a new entity, a new concept that we have launched that encompasses all of our programs here at the Space Foundation that will take people through a lifelong learning of STEAM. And so what the Center for Innovation and Education does is it focuses people into that workforce pipeline to get kids excited, and on our end, get kids excited about STEM careers, STEAM careers. And the reason this is important is the space economy is to surpass $1 trillion within the decade. And that is substantial. It has been on an upward trend where some other industries have not been. Now, the critical thing here with COVID is right now, 35 million Americans are unemployed, and millions of students are having to adjust to different learning environments, learning styles. And so this gives us the opportunity to innovate not only industry, but innovate education. There's an opportunity for revolution. And so with CI&E and our programs that we can administer, we have that roadmap to get people along that path and to promote lifelong learning. And Audra, there it just kind of goes into a graphic there of our programs. And if you look at pre-K to 12 students all the way up to professionals, you can see the different programs that we have, such as our Junior Space Entrepreneur Program, which recently won a Fast Company World Innovation Award, our teacher professional development programs, et cetera. And so, as you can see with CI&E, we will help people get into that workforce pipeline all the way from pre-K all the way through their careers. And here's another graphic, which kind of outlines some of the things that I just highlighted. And so you can see, as far as the education programs specifically, we have focus programs for teachers and educators, including our teacher liaison program. These are amazing teachers from all over the world that can apply to be in our programs. We have programs for elementary school students, Discover the Universe field trips. And with COVID, of course, we're doing them virtually. And so students, whether they're working in a classroom online with their teacher or working with their parents, they can sign up and we can do virtual field trips. Right now on our Science on a Sphere, which is a giant 6-foot diameter globe that we can project things on. And we're getting ready to do our Mars Robotics Lab, where students will be able to log in and drive rovers in our lab. I think we have a picture coming up later that kind of shows you what it is, but it's one of the largest Mars Robotics Labs in the world, and students from anywhere in the world can drive rovers in there. And so not only do we have that, but Audra's going to tell us a little bit about some of the virtual programs that we have.
Back to you.
All right. Well, thank you guys. And so, yeah, as you can see, the Space Foundation does have a wide variety of offerings depending on what the age might be, whether they're young students or young adults or up and coming professionals. So we have kind of something for every age group. So, and then Bryan, so you kind of talked a little bit about the different trends that we're kind of seeing. And so it kind of brings us to our next question is, what are the current trends that we're seeing in aerospace and education?
Well, I can go ahead and take the aerospace part, and I'll let Audra take the education part. What we're seeing right now in the aerospace industry is obviously, unfortunately, we didn't get to see the launch yesterday of the SpaceX Dragon capsule. That would have been a perfect timing intro into this segment. But obviously, we're seeing that trend in getting humans back into space from American soil as far as Americans are concerned, but around the globe, it's that push to get humans back to the moon and onto Mars. And so a lot of the trends we're seeing is not only in human space flight, but all of the industries that will feed into that. Another important part of that is going to be artificial intelligence. Once we get to the moon, get to Mars, the trends are figuring out how to keep humans alive in these hostile environments. And so sustainable habitats, additive manufacturing, we're not going to be able to take all of the materials and supplies with us. So learning how to print things, 3D print things in microgravity or in lunar or Mars gravity environments is going to be tough. And then of course, robotics is going to be huge. And then outside of that, there are some other technology trends that we see coming up around the globe. And a lot of that has to do with actually space technology spinoffs. And so the energy and energy storage, how to utilize solar energy, wind energy, miniaturization of materials. Our iPhones now, our phones are more powerful than the computers were 5 years ago. And so taking that, those materials that we can shrink down and store more data on phones, et cetera, that's what we're looking at getting into. And so the smaller, the lighter, the better. And of course, if you're looking at the space environment, debris monitoring and cleanup, that last bullet there, right now, especially low Earth orbit is kind of becoming a junkyard with things floating around. It's very packed. And we're trying to find solutions on how to monitor the materials floating around up there, the satellites floating around up there, the bolts, the nuts, the paint chips, and then figuring out what to do with all that junk. So those are the trends that we see right now in the aerospace industry. But tying into that are trends into education. And so I'll let Audra kind of highlight what's going on in education right now.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand that when we look at the educational system today, it's very different than it was at the beginning of March or end of February. It has morphed and it has become this very steep learning curve where we want to educate our children. When we look at the trends that are there for technology, we also have to address how we're going to prepare students for these potential career pathways that fulfill those needs that we're seeing. And so part of what we do at the Space Foundation is just that. But I kind of want to talk about the shifts that we've seen occur from the educational perspective in industry, from, as we call education, somewhat of an industry. But we've basically displaced about 50 million students. That's not a small number. When you look at those numbers and you say, we now have to make this major pivot. We have 50 million children that are no longer in brick and mortar school buildings. They're now being taught at home. Yes, there's teacher support. Those teachers are working their tails off to get out there and get to those children and serve them. But we know for a fact that we're going to see some loss in educational time. It was a major pivot. We now are starting to have discussions about digital divide. It's a great term. Someone coined it. I don't know who it is, but they definitely earned it. Basically, we're seeing, Microsoft did a research study and they found that there's about 25 million people who do not have access to broadband internet. That's a significant number of individuals now who are supposed to be homeschooling and supporting their children from home through virtual aspect. That's a concern. We also then have, of course, that loss of in-class socialization and learning time that happens and the relationships that get built within schools and in those classrooms. We're seeing assessments being changed. We're trying to say, are students ready to move on to that next grade? And yet, did we give them the time and the opportunity to learn the material they need? For example, the third graders work on multiplication. They need that to be able to do fourth grade division. Multiplication is usually taught in the second half of the school year. So we can see that there's going to be some shifts and kind of disconnects, I would say, between where we left children off when we asked them to go home and when we asked them to come back. We also have a very huge number of teachers that are really not as confident as you think doing virtual instruction. They may not have used the tools. They're being asked to use new platforms. We saw that curve kind of shift starting in March and April. May, teachers are kind of coming around and now it's the end of the school year. So what teachers are being asked to do and what children are being asked to do and what their parents are being asked to do We forget that these children are at home with parents that potentially both parents are working full time. How are they educating? So we're seeing a very big kind of snowball effect of all of this COVID issue. I think one of the larger things too that we're also observing, and I'm seeing research out about kind of regarding, is the ACT and SATs and the formal assessments. We have juniors that should be taking them. Sometimes sophomores do their pre-SATs. We certainly have seniors that need these scores to enter colleges. So now we've impacted the college level of instruction to say, how are you going to admit these students? They are missing an entire semester of coursework. Some students went from grade levels or grade evaluations to pass-fail courses. That's difficult for a college admissions office to look at. We may not have those test scores for them to actually be able to apply those in with their applications. So when we look at all these kinds of offerings that we used to have that help support a child's growth and be able to show their knowledge, we're not always seeing that as a tool anymore. Additionally, what we're hearing and seeing in research that I'm reading is saying that a lot of these seniors that were graduating from college had job offers that were retracted or had internships that were retracted. One, there's nowhere for them to go. If we're in COVID and we're on social distancing, there's no workplace for them to go and intern. So they're trying to do things. We're seeing companies adjust. We're seeing teachers adjust to offer virtual output opportunities for these kids. But again, we have to really look at the bigger picture, which, rather than create a doom and gloom, it's just a reality of where we are today. How do we support these students? So from our perspective, and I think also we're seeing again that a lot of support in this is that they're starting to consider reopening schools. What does that mean for the teacher? What does that mean for the students? And what does that mean for the families? We have the safety concerns of COVID and social distancing. And what I keep reading, and I'm finding, I'm trying not to giggle, but the reality is I'm not sure how they're going to do this. We're asking schools to open where classrooms were already overpopulated. We have 30 to 35 students in some teachers' classrooms without teacher support as far as parapros or any assistance in there. And they're saying they're going to create social distancing for these students. I'm not sure how that's going to work. There's a lot of ideas out there and theories out there where first grade goes to school on Mondays and second grade goes on Tuesdays. But that idea of how do you actually now social distance within a very cramped classroom as it is. We also talk about the cost evaluation. From a superintendent or a federal level, these schools are funded. We need to be sure that the money is going to be spent the right way. There's a lot of discussions on how that's going to work. Do we do brick and mortar schools? Do we do hybrid? Do we do virtual opportunities? Do we keep them on virtual? What's less expensive to make sure we can maintain and serve those 50 million students that have been displaced? We also know that we have to think about the other side of it, that social side and the real life side, which is all those parents trying to work from home full time and keep their jobs intact. How easy is it for them to actually provide the education for their children that needs to be supported? Teachers are doing a great job, as I said earlier, but again, we're putting students in front of a computer and parents need to help. Someone needs to help. And so who is going to do that? Last kind of real important thing for me, of course, as an educator, is are we getting our students the content they need to be able to progress at the normal rate that they would? And we're not looking at retentions. We're not looking at students dropping out. We're not looking at low attendance, which is actually what happened. I heard some very scary statistics, never was able to validate those statistics, but something like 6% of the student population was actually logging in that first month. That means that 94% of students were struggling to get online for whatever reason. So we know that learning stopped or was paused for a temporary time. And what content did we have to give up to finish that school year out for these students? So that's kind of our fear, is where do we go to help support these students now? We've got summer kicking in. There's always this very scary thing called the summer shift or summer slide, where we see students lose ground, maybe potentially 2 or 3 months of content knowledge when they come back their following year. As teachers, we've experienced it. As parents, we've experienced it. Kids don't know always all the time that they missed something. But we need to make sure that we're educating throughout the summer to make sure we're trying to close some of those gaps that we've created because of COVID, which then leads to the, do you really go really big and be really big and brave in some of these districts and say, we're just going to do an AR classroom. We're never going to bring these kids back to school. We'll use our brick and mortars for kind of, meet and greets, and we just build an AR classroom. Personally, at the Space Foundation, that's exciting for us as a possible solution, because we are very invested in the technologies that we've talked about, the trends that we need students to be exposed to. They need to be aware of these career pathways, and AR classrooms are a great opportunity. I wouldn't recommend we do it tomorrow, but I certainly would say it's something to consider in the future if we look 20 years down the line. Thank you, Keith.
And so, you bring up a lot of great points, and we're seeing a lot of these, kind of trends, especially within the United States. And there's a few graphs that we can kind of bring up that kind of shows kind of how the United States is stacking up with, other areas around the world, I mean, globally. So, Audra or Bryan, if you wanted to kind of speak a little bit on maybe some of these graphs, and we don't have to get into too much detail, but you kind of see where the United States kind of ranks or stacks up.
Sure. This first graph is actually saying access to access, which I love the title because it's saying, are we allowing students access to what they need to get to? And the United States is certainly not at the top. We pride ourselves with our tech knowledge and our tech abilities, but, again, we're looking at a broadband issue. We're looking at the ability to have a laptop or a computer or a Surface Pro or a tablet to do their work on. I actually spoke with a woman that was struggling. She has 5 children, all in different grades. And all of them had teachers assign a 10 o'clock class. Well, she had 1 computer. So when we look at that, she has the technology. She doesn't have enough 10 o'clock slots for 5 children to log on. So when we look at this first graph, it's just simply saying that how many students do have access to computers that they can use. And the United States is up there. Everybody's pretty close. I mean, we're seeing Turkey and kind of Mexico as those low kind of, lower hanging fruit countries, but generally we're right there in par. The little slash that's on there, I think, is worth noting because that's saying the number of disadvantaged schools. So while we're in par with everyone, we happen to have a little bit lower slide on how many schools we're saying are in that disadvantaged category, which is why our numbers are not so bad. If you flip to the next slide, this is the part I wanted to talk about just for a second. When I mentioned how students and teachers are somewhat hesitant to jump into this kind of new learning virtual environment, this is kind of an example. If you look to the far left, we've got, I should say, Shanghai, we've got Latvia, we've got some of these kind of Scandinavian countries that are showing that teachers are very interested in kind of promoting this virtual learning. The black dot is saying that they actually go above and beyond that normalcy of I want to put education, or I should say virtual pieces in front of my students, but then they're saying they do the extra work to learn how to do it. And so, we see Norway on there where that little black dot is super high. Those teachers are engaged. They want to, they spend the time to learn those next pieces. The US falls down the line a little bit. Again, we're not at the bottom of the list. We have teachers, of course, that are wanting to help their students and they are doing the extra work. That little gap is kind of what you're looking at. So we're okay. We're not great. We're not some of the highest performers on that. Now, again, as an educator myself, I understand time, right? We've been tasked with a lot of things to do in a day, and then to go over and above is sometimes difficult from our days, and today even more so. And then Keith, if you go to the next 2 slides, I'll just quick summarize those because I did discuss them.
Yeah.
But
And actually, if you don't have a point I kind of want to make to this one as well, it could also be the resources those educators have.
yes.
Sometimes it's often not the willingness, it's that those resources that are available to them. Kind of brings you back to your last graph with the disadvantaged schools. It could come down to those resources that inhibit this. So.
Absolutely. And that's probably the #1 thing we see in research is teachers talking about resources, and not just physical resources, but the time resources. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. These 2 I'll just quickly go over, but it's basically an overview. The NWEA is a huge resource out there where we use to track student growth throughout a year. And students will take assessments throughout the year. It's kind of a formal but not really formal assessment. It can be used very formally. So what NWA put out recently was kind of a comparison of where we saw schools close, typically where we see students end up at the end of a school year as a score, a generic score, and then where they expect them to be kind of when they go back in September. If you look at it, it's not as scary of a graph as you would expect. I would have expected to see a much lower drop off or decline. What this is implying is that they may not have lost a lot of ground, that from school closure, students will come back a little bit higher in their student growth. Unfortunately, we would want to see a much larger growth. So we are, ultimately we're seeing a little bit of a loss of skills because of timing. And Keith, the next one is exactly the same. This was a reading graph. This is your math graph. They look very similar. So we're seeing that, we're not seeing that peak sustain is what I should say. So thank you, Keith, for showing us those.
Oh, definitely. And so, we're kind of talking a little bit about the future and really the importance of STEM education, but then kind of what that future might look like, which, brings us right into our next question. And, in you guys' opinion, what is the importance? We talked a little bit about it. If you can kind of give a little bit more of how STEM or STEAM is going to play a role in the future, but then also what is the future of STEM education going to look like?
Yeah, and I'll answer real quick, but I think we have to, again, consider that AR, VR kind of idea that potentially we do some hybrid learning so that we can get students engaged in it. But we've got to work with that kind of, that digital divide, because that's going to be present for a lot of our students. But from a trend perspective, I think Bryan can share a little bit more about what we'll see, how we'll see that STEM and that STEAM education impact kind of the industry.
Right, and kind of address the STEAM-STEM issue. We believe in STEAM, adding the arts in there. We feel that's just as important. The reason we think that is, you know, the arts are they stimulate the creative side of the brain. And if we're going to be solving these solutions, these complex solutions to keep humans alive on the moon and Mars, we're going to need creative solutions to come up with those answers. And we saw that with COVID, that there were some very creative people out there that came up with solutions to help students learn, keep businesses running. And so the reason STEAM is important, the reason we advocate for this is the STEAM skills cut across every sector of almost every industry in the workforce. And one thing to note, Bureau of Labor Statistics 2 years ago came out and said that by 2026, 50% of all jobs in the United States are going to be associated with STEM, with the STEM industries. And so we feel that getting kids into that workforce pipeline, getting them interested is a critical thing. And the important thing with STEAM is it does promote those 21st century essential skills that we feel all kids need. Some of the newer ones that have popped up, if you know, everybody's familiar with communication, collaboration, which has become, you know, important, but digital literacy, creativity, cognitive load management, having the ability to handle many different priorities is becoming critical. And one thing we're noticing now post-COVID, there are some other essential skills that we're seeing emerge. For example, virtual collaboration. That is obvious in this COVID world where you're having to learn how to work in groups, but in separate locations. And so, you know, that's going to be important. Cross-cultural competency, cross-cultural collaboration, learning how to work with people in other countries and how they view the world and how their technology capabilities. You know, we've discovered that here at the Space Foundation with our outreach. And so things like that, new media literacy, as new technologies like AR and VR evolve, the ability to understand and use those to become effective is critical. And one thing with STEAM careers that's important is oftentimes as teachers, we will talk to our students and say, you know, to be that astronaut, to be that engineer, that's what we tend to focus on. And one thing with STEAM education that we like to promote with teachers and with students is you don't have to be just an astronaut, just an engineer to get into this workforce. Oftentimes, people overlook the critical job skills like electricians, welders, nutritionists, dietitians. All of those career fields still feed into this STEAM education. And so we see that as important. And the reason we want to get these young kids into this pipeline and get them excited about STEAM careers is it kind of reflects what Audra was saying with those graphs. The United States is falling behind when you look at how many degrees in the STEM fields are being given out each year. For example, in 2016, China gave out 4.7 million degrees in the STEM fields. When you compare India, 2.6 million, the United States was 568,000 STEM degrees were given out that year. So when you compare that to China's 4.7 million, that's 8 times as many as the United States. And so we're starting to fall behind. Another thing the Space Foundation is noticing is we're seeing different countries reach out to us, asking us to write curriculum for them, K-12 curriculum, but they want it all to be centered around space. And that's the amazing thing about space. It is exciting. It is that hook, that platform that will get kids excited about learning. And so we feel that in the United States, we need to keep par with everybody else. And so, we promote that using space as that platform, that's what's going to get kids excited. Building and launching rockets, flying drones, those are the things that will get kids excited and get them into this pipeline. And of course, we've talked a little bit about AR and VR already. We're in talks right now with various AR and VR companies about how we can start to utilize those technologies in the future classroom. Like Audra mentioned, we feel that education is going to change a bit. And so looking at these technologies that will bring kids together is what we feel is the future of education.
Awesome. Audra, I'll give you an opportunity if there's anything you want to add to that, to talk about kind of the importance or maybe more of the future of STEAM education and where that's going to go.
VR has been around 20 years, right? This isn't a new concept. I think that it wasn't as popular in the classroom settings as you'd think it was going to be because I was back in the classroom back then when it first started coming out. And I think from a teacher's perspective, when COVID hit, all they wanted to do was say, how do I even get 30 kids to log in? We had much bigger priorities than let's get some VR in front of them or make the lesson fun. We just needed them to log in. So I think that was our first concern as far as where is STEAM education going to go, was let's just get the teachers up to speed. A lot of these teachers worked off, like I said, hours and hours and hours extra to try to learn the platforms. We at the Space Foundation put together very quickly some very fast virtual learning things to help support teachers in their kind of transformation into a virtual environment. But I think that I personally think, again, and some research is supporting me, that we're going to see that shift where there becomes a comfort level with that when we do start having students log in consistently and we do find that learning is working this way. There's so many platforms out there right now that are wide open for teachers to use. They're free to use. Everything from Zoom, for example, like we're using today. You can do breakout rooms, you can do Q&A, children can raise their hands virtually. So I think we're going to see a comfort level settle in here in a little bit. We do have a problem with teacher output as far as educated teachers graduating from school as well. So not only we're talking about a decrease in the US, I shouldn't say decrease, but let's say a leveling of a very low number of tech jobs, kind of students coming out. Teacher prep programs are not turning out the teachers they used to turn out. How do we get students today to say, yeah, I want to be a teacher when they never get to meet their teacher, for example? This can be a problem. So there's a bit of a conundrum that we're being placed in because of this crisis. But I think, ultimately we're going to see a more robust hybrid model where you're going to have a brick and mortar school, again, that has students come in and potentially they'll be doing some hybrid learning from home. We know that there are quite a number of large companies that are coming out and offering full educational curriculum online. I actually was part of a startup school here in Denver that was a virtual program only. I know the problems that go along with that. They're not as simple as you think. Attendance is your #1 issue. So we had more people staffed to handle truancy than we did educators. So there's kind of problems you need to know exist in the world. It's not an easy shift. So do I think STEAM education will be compromised some? Probably. Do I think math is? Do I think art is going to be? I do. And so I think there has to be some really creative minds doing some reinvention, some reimagining, kind of reinforcement of things and reorganizing of all of this kind of philosophy about how do we teach now. I do not think we'll go back to normal. You will see families who have said, this works better for us. And I think you're going to see a change and maybe a shift even from the family side, not just the educational perspective.
Definitely. I think kind of the current times have definitely opened some eyes and opened some minds to some new ways to solve old problems, and also now that brings new problems that now we have to look to solve as well. So it's definitely kind of innovating, kind of that forced innovation kind of thing.
And yet we want to keep these kids on these career pathways. So if we're not educating them as to what's out there, we may lose them. And when we talk about attendance and dropout rates, we have to keep them engaged and interested in this. So as teachers, it's our responsibility to make sure that kids know what those careers look like. Again, one of the things we do is we partner with those prime aerospace companies to fund virtual programs and put those people who are doing those careers in front of the kids. For example, we're in the middle, smack in the middle of a 15 series program where each day there's a career individual doing that career in aerospace speaking to students. And that's kind of, I think, how we have to start to think about things. And how do you make this a little bit more real life for kids? We might get them to log in more if they know they're going to talk to, you know, an engineer or a welder or an electrician, and somebody that kind of speaks to them, I think is where we may see the need to kind of progress.
Definitely. And then I think you guys both kind of touched on it a little bit, talking about, Bryan, you made the comment that not every kid has to be an astronaut. But we get that question a lot. You know, we always say, you know, well, I don't want to be an astronaut, but I want to be in space, but what do I do? You know, and so do students have to become an astronaut to have a career in the space industry? And if you guys can talk a little bit about that and what other maybe opportunities are out there for students.
Sure. Yeah, the astronaut career choice is always easy to promote because it's exciting. You know, you see, like yesterday with the launch, you see the astronauts getting in their suits, all the attention is on them. You know, they hop in the capsule, but not every kid is excited about hurtling through space at 17,500 miles an hour. And so to them, being an astronaut is not exciting. And so if the only career choice that's shown to them is an astronaut, they may realize that, you know what, maybe I don't want to do this career, but there are so many other things. You know, for every kind of the story goes, for every astronaut that goes into space, there are at least 10,000 people that worked on that mission. And so, you know, you have the engineers that design and build the crafts. You have the welders, the electricians that actually build the rocket and wire the rocket. You have the chemists that come up with the new rocket fuels. You have the nutritionists, the dietitians that keep the astronauts healthy. You know, and once we start sending astronauts to the moon and Mars, that creates whole new realms of possibilities for the workforce. You know, space farming, you know, Mark Watney in The Martian. Keeping the humans alive, keeping the astronauts alive when we go to the moon and Mars, we're not going to be able to take all the food with us when we go there. And so we're going to have to figure out ways how to grow food in environments where they are genetically not designed to grow. And so we see all these different career choices. Almost every career out there can have some tie with the space industry. And one career choice I like to talk about is being a fashion designer. And believe it or not, there are fashion designers that are involved in the space industry. They help design the NASA spacesuits. I know when Virgin Galactic started designing their spacesuits for their trips into low Earth orbit, they hired one of the top French fashion designers to design the tourist spacesuits. Because if you're going to spend $200,000 for a flight, you want to look good, right?
And you want to keep your suit.
And you want to keep your suit. And so, you know, if it's going to be hanging on your wall or, you know, in a glass case in your living room or whatever, as a talking piece, you want that spacesuit to look good. So even fashion designers are finding ways into the space industry. And so one thing we like to talk to teachers to get them thinking about it, talk to students, is it doesn't matter what career you want to choose. If you love space, there is that career path for you, even with music, even with art, which is why we like to promote STEAM.
Absolutely.
And you guys, I just want to make one real quick point about that. One of the things that's, I think, really interesting with Global Minded is we have a lot of what we call cross-pollinators. And so I don't know if you've met Dr. Sarah Lynn Mark, but she's one of the people working on, you know, she's a medical doctor, but she's working on those spacesuits. So there is so much cross-pollination needed for these really key decisions from a lot of different areas within that STEAM field, you know, including medicine.
Absolutely. Carol, it's a great point, because when we think about it, you know, folks that want to be doctors, nurses, technicians, we need to have that biofeedback. And these suits are starting to incorporate all of that biofeedback and all the mechanics necessary to track heart rate and actually even perspiration. So people are really having an opportunity. Every single industry is going to have an opportunity to participate in this. I think when we started talking about the privatization of space is when we started to say, hey, this is a bigger career field than we thought. And I think that it's important that teachers really understand that and that they convey that to their students clearly, that it's not just the astronaut. And we say that a lot. And we do love our astronauts, by the way. We do have a fabulous team that helps support us. But and kids do still love to meet the astronaut. But our astronauts are fantastic advocates for all of this industry pieces. I actually attended a session with one, and he asked the students in this class, it was a group of high school students, and he said, you name any profession and I'll tell you how it connected to my being able to launch. And the only one that stumped him was karate. So he's thinking on that. And I, proposed potentially Newton's laws of physics and, so yeah. But I mean, I think that's the only one that stumped him so far, but I'm sure he'll come up with a reason and a connection somehow to that. Probably physical exertion, but yes.
Definitely. Yeah, and kind of speak with that as well. I think during the launch yesterday, Elon Musk kind of made a comment about, someone asked him about the spacesuit design, and he said he had a team battling that conflict of wanting to be functional but yet look good. And, there's that, you kind of have to pay respects to both. Obviously, it has to be a functional suit, but you want it to look good because you want it to stand out and be inspiring, because those suits, they are inspiring, and not only just to inspire them to be astronauts, but to inspire kids to kind of get into those space career fields and those new STEAM career fields. So agreed. So it kind of brings us to kind of one of our last questions here, and kind of give you guys an opportunity to talk about what the Space Foundation is doing. So what is the Space Foundation doing to help support these educational communities, especially through everything we've talked about with the different types of trends and the different difficulties that we're going to have coming up, especially with COVID and then beyond COVID?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you'll flip to the next slide for me, Keith, that would be awesome. I think what we'll kind of do is talk about how, from a industry standpoint, we need to support people doing these kinds of things. And teachers, of course, are our number one kind of front. And I say that not to diminish the students having the need and being number one, but the teachers have to be there to support them. And so I think what you're going to see again is a shift in industry to really support teacher impact. And we offer a couple of different programs, the Space Across the Curriculum and the Teacher Liaison programs. Both of these are teacher PDs. The Teacher Liaison program actually takes a hand-selected cadre of teachers, and we actually create a mentoring and a collaborative group amongst them. We have about 250 teachers in this program over about 13 countries. So we're actually going global with this, where teachers can communicate with, teachers in the US can communicate with teachers in India. But I think what we're finding, again, is that collaboration, right? That community. We need to support that teacher community, and programs like this kind of do that. The teacher PDs that we offer now are fully virtual. And so because of COVID and 6-foot distancing, we used to have 100 teachers show up at our facility. We're doing it virtually now. And I think that pivot is going to be pretty critical. We're seeing a lot of industry, like I said, do this pivot. We're seeing some of those prime aerospace companies supporting that pivot. For example, we had live sessions we were supposed to be doing in Huntsville about 2 weeks ago. We switched to the virtual offering, and they were fully in support of that. So it's good to see that the funding is going to continue for virtual outreach and make sure that that still continues to happen. And if you flip to the next slide there for me, Keith.
Well, I think it's kind of maybe worth mentioning too. I think for those who get interested in the Teacher Liaison program, I think we'll have a new enrollment within the next few months or so for that one. And I think we also have a possible Space Across the Curriculum coming up soon as well. So I would say definitely check the, okay. I don't want to spoil the surprise, so I'll hold off then.
Not the scholarship information. But yeah, we do. We want to make sure that it's always kind of an opportunity for teachers to get involved with, and I'll share a little bit about how to find out more about that with us. But then we talk about that workforce impact, right? So the teachers are there to support that workforce impact. And we as teachers, honestly, guys, we were not taught this when we went through our teacher programs. Hey, by the way, the reason you're teaching is to make sure they have a great career pathway. We heard that. We didn't know what those career pathways were. We knew our industry. We didn't necessarily know every other industry that we could encourage children to kind of have as a pursuit. So we really want to make sure that we're educating the teachers with that. What are those pathways that are out there? Who are they with? Talk to those people and get the teachers trained. In addition, of course, we can help with the students. And so that idea of bringing career pathways to them and putting it in front of them is what we want. The Space Foundation specifically believes in immersive hands-on learning. And so anything we do with our children that we're, gifted enough and lucky enough to work with, the students that we're asked to be put in front of, we try to help them understand what's out there, but also make them do it. And I know make is a funny word, but help and guide and support. By offering programs for them, such as Space Foundation University, which is in conjunction with Space Center Houston, the students actually go and immerse themselves into real world scenarios. becoming astronauts, so to speak, and the entire team, and do a launch to Mars and the moon, do some experimentation from the science aspect of it, but have to work as collaborative teams together. And then they go to Space Center Houston, where they do the astronaut training in the pools, and they do the neutral buoyancy kind of thing. So that kind of putting kids into that is going to be, I think, where we can catch. Now, a little tough virtually, but we'll figure it out. And then we do a lot of different kind of competitions. So we're working on some robotics competitions. We're doing some competitions that are global, and that will help us. Again, we're trying to create a cross-collaborative community on this globe. And if we put students together with students from China and India and Pakistan and Italy, and we mix up their groups, they don't go as a US team, they go as a team that works together. And so we'll intermingle the countries of students to do these competitions. The summer camps that we put on are really immersive. Again, as teachers, you need to think about how we do that in this current environment. You can't put them next to each other, but how do you have them have the same experiences when they're out, separated? And then, of course, we want to make sure that we also address community, because it's a holistic kind of view. And as we talk about whole children in education, and we're serving the whole need of the child, we have to be serving parents. We have to be serving industry. If they don't know what's going on in the educational realm, parents included, we're not going to have the support that the students should get after they leave the classroom each day. So we want to make sure that we're creating that continuum of impact. When we talk about our community impact here, it's everything from putting an astronaut in front of a community and having them just share their stories with them. We can do that virtually. Our last virtual audience with an astronaut had over 1,000 people log in to watch this, just sitting in their homes. We have new gen programs here at the Space Foundation that support kind of that new generation of students and I should say young adults, even teenagers at times, with mentoring and communication and collaboration amongst that. And then we also have our Space Commerce program, which leads into the adult workforce support. And so I think, from a global minded ed program and from what the Space Foundation does, we have this holistic view of how we support every age along this pathway to stay in industry and get good jobs and maintain those jobs. And then, of course, we try to make sure that we do some governmental outreach so that we can, again, incorporate this content that Global Ed does, that Space Foundation does, from a governmental standpoint, who's making decisions and policies. And we're not lobbying, but we certainly are there to say, hey, we're here to help you understand what STEAM and STEM is and those careers that are out there for kids.
Awesome. That's great. So we have here, see, it looks like the Junior Space Entrepreneur Program. And I think, Brian, you may have kind of alluded to this earlier on in the program, but we have some images here. So I'll give you guys an opportunity to kind of talk a little bit more about this program.
Yeah, so when we originally had committed to doing this, we were going to have an entire panel for all the support teams that we had to put this program together and share it with you. But I can say that most of what we talked about today is why we made this program. It's a newer program. We launched it January, actually I should say last June, with teachers, and kind of did a test run with it. But the concept that, again, we need these students doing this immersive learning, doing this hands-on learning, being submerged in the real world scenarios is what we weren't seeing teachers having time to do in classrooms. They wanted to, they were passionate about it, but they weren't able to do it. They just didn't have the time or the bandwidth or the ability or the resources. So one of the things that Keith actually and his team and my team developed was this program called Junior Space Entrepreneur Program. And the goal of it was, again, put them in a real world scenario. And their goal is to work as teams. They weren't allowed to pick their friends. We like to make sure that they're collaborating as real world would. It's not always your best friend you're sitting next to in a cubicle, but making sure that they had to work outside of their comfort zone. And in that time period, it was a week-long program. And in that time period, they formed small mini companies that were to travel to Mars, find a tech transfer product, potentially off the NASA list of tech transfer products, which are free and everybody can try to serve them. And we talk about Space Commerce Program. These are great opportunities for adults to really do this, but they can find a product that they feel like they needed to solve a problem and create the product for that as the solution, I should say. And so we took this great cadre of kids up in Highlands Ranch, put the program in front of them. They did a lot of space science, and the whole time they're developing business attributes. And so we partnered with Junior Achievement Rocky Mountain, and Meg was a phenomenal support for us there, working with us to help us recreate an entrepreneur business program to tie into the science piece that we were teaching. And so it really was encompassing of what real world would be. You're now in industry, you have a job title, you have a task that has to be completed for that, and then you really have to come up with the solution, and we threw the science and space in at them. So it was really a successful program. And I think from a teacher's perspective, the teacher feedback was phenomenal. They were saying, this is all the math concepts I had to teach this semester. This is the science concept I had to teach this semester. The writing teachers were saying, oh my gosh, the writing they had to do. So it helps when you think about how do you make a product, for example, that's going to serve the whole need of the kid, but do it in a week. And so that was what our goal was with this program. And the feedback was phenomenal. We started hearing from parents, which was even better, because when a kid goes home and a parent says, what'd you do today? And they said, I had a great recess. That's not always the best answer. We want them to say, I had an amazing time learning math. And so if we can hide the math and we can embed it into learning, it really creates a kind of a buy-in from the students. And so this program is just an example of what you can do with your kids, is create kind of a week-long immersive thing, and make sure your math teacher's happy and your writing teacher's happy at the same time.
Kind of get that cross curriculum going in all the programs. So
Exactly.
Yeah. So we have here an image of the Mars Robotics Laboratory, and Bryan, once again, you kind of spoke to this a little bit earlier. So if you guys want to kind of talk a little bit about kind of these virtual spaces that we're going to be kind of now using in the Discovery Center.
Sure. So here's a picture of our Mars Robotics Laboratory. This was my brainchild about 8 years ago. And what I wanted to do is have a place where people could come and, again, have that immersive experience where they could drive rovers on Mars. And I did work with rover drivers at JPL and tried to make the experience as close to real as possible. What you don't see here is a room on the other side of that wall that acts as our mission control. And so we can have, well, once we're allowed to have people back in the building, have students in mission control talking to people on Mars, running these missions. And one thing that was always a vision was to have this accessible to students anywhere in the world. And so Audra and Keith and their team have done a wonderful job of being able to create a system, a network with cameras where students can do the science, do the learning in their classrooms,
Or at home.
Or at home, yeah, and drive the rovers remotely and see them in real time. And so with the missions that we do in our Mars Robotics Laboratory, not only is it our Junior Space Entrepreneur Program, but it's also missions where we can teach project management skills to students. And we're now getting it set up for virtual field trips. So parents working with their students at home, or teachers working with their students at their homes, will be able to log in and do missions in our Mars Robotics Laboratory. And so we're trying to find new and innovative ways to use this amazing space. This is one of the largest Mars Robotics labs in the world. And so we want to be able to share that with students and even parents, workers. You know, we do team building for corporations in our Mars Robotics Lab. And so these are the types of things, that innovative labs that we have here at the Discovery Center, that we want to share with the world and get those kids immersed and show them what kinds of careers there are out there.
And I think it's worth adding on that, you know, we're talking about our programs, and of course that's, you know, the wise thing to do is the Space Foundation and advocates for us. But I don't want to ever forget that teachers, there are millions of online resources out there and available for free. And you need to, you know, attending the Global Minded Ed conferencing pieces and watching these videos on their YouTube, because there's so many tools and techniques being shared out there that you just may not have the time to do. And so keeping in mind that those resources are out there, they're virtual. We kind of coined our program the name Auxilia, which is helping hands. And so our Reach Out program is called Auxilia. You can go to our website and check it out. There's tons and tons of free resources on there. But again, it's to support that teacher, make them feel comfortable in their classroom. It's to support the student learning. And if a teacher doesn't know what to teach tomorrow and has to teach a concept lesson, we probably have a video recording for you. So that idea, to find that on the web, look at all those resources, and there's so many great companies doing this. Don't forget to look for it. Instead of recreating a wheel and taking the time, teachers, use those resources that someone else has developed for you.
Awesome. And as we're kind of getting towards the end of our time, so you see we have some resources here to where we kind of collected the data to present to you guys. But what we would like to do is check to see if we have any questions that were posed out there.
And you know what, while
Q&A.
you do that, check on the questions, and I just want to mention a couple of things that we also partner with the UN Office of Strategic Partnerships. We work with the International Labor Organization and the World Academy of Art and Sciences, as had mentioned earlier. So I think there's some really great ways to knit these things together, but I really want to acknowledge that you all have done such a great job on the practical and professional piece of all of this, and really providing the integrated skills. And I think that's what gets kids motivated, even if they don't want to go into space, but they learn all this, their view is wider, and so much of growing up is exploring. And so you learn the things you love, you learn the things that maybe you're not so suited for, but you've got a bigger world because of that exposure. So it's really great what you all have put together. And we have, Celeste and I, a bunch of ideas of some things we can be doing, I think, in tandem. So
good. That's exciting. And we look at what you guys do, and I honestly, the resources that are out there for teachers that you're providing is just, it's showing that support system, right? We all have to be a community. We try to view ourselves as one great giant community. So that idea of being able to support one another is really what our goal is.
Well, ours too. And thank you all so much for your time. And Keith, were there a couple questions, or do you want to see if there were any of those?
So looking on here, there isn't any current questions. So for those who are listening, if you guys have any questions, definitely make sure you add those into the Q&A box. And I think we have still a few minutes to put those questions in.
Yep.
And so we can get those answered. But I mean, Audra and Bryan, is there anything else you guys want to add, kind of towards in closing of this broadcast?
I would just say to to students, to parents, the adults, I would just say be open to these innovative things that are coming down. Some will work, some won't, but I think the key is, as we go forward post-COVID, be open to opportunities, be open to different technologies. You never know what solutions may arise from it. Just that willingness to try new things. And so I think that's where the innovation comes from, and just that openness and that willing to try new things, even if you fail. That's what we tell our students all the time, is it's okay to fail. And we're figuring that out with COVID. There have been a lot of failures, but that's the only time you learn things. And so that's my advice.
I agree. I'll second that. I think it's important for teachers to just feel comfortable. Everything that they're doing is good. So anything more that they want to do is even better.
It will say, here's to the entrepreneurial mindset. That's what that is. So, well, kudos to all of you, and thank you so much for pivoting and being part of this virtual event this year. And we hope we'll see you live next June, and hopefully long before that with our vaccinations. And thanks for everything. And we look forward to following up with you all.
We do. Thank you so much. Yes.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Celeste, bye-bye.